Can you see my screen, Dan? Perfect, good. So thank you all for joining. This is our kind of second session for Kitchener Canada Developer Group, and we are so lucky that we have Dan today with us, Daniel Peter. He is going to give us extremely valuable knowledge sharing on how to build Lightning apps. So without any further delay, let me quickly jump to the next screen. I'd like to thank to our sponsor. We have Appidio with us. They are actually sponsoring us, and we have Cloud Vandana from India. They are also sponsoring us in terms of Zoom account and all these things, right? So I'm really thankful for both these companies for supporting us. This is a very quick introduction of myself. My name is Sudipta Deb. I am a technical architect with Appidio, and I am like 2.5 trailhead rangers. Like I'm having now, I think 252 trailhead badges. I'm Salesforce certified, and I have my own blog, which is like sudipta.-dev.in. I keep on updating my blog with my experiment and all my learnings. At the same time, I'm organizing this Kitchener Canada Developer Group, and you can always follow me at my Twitter account, which is like Sudipta_1984, which is my date of birth. And then I would like to introduce Daniel Peter here. He's I don't think we need much introduction of Daniel Peter. He's well known within this Salesforce Ohana. So but still I just want to introduce quickly. He's a Salesforce MVP, 24x Salesforce certified. Wow, that's definitely the wow factor. He's a leader of the Bay Area Salesforce Developer Group, and he's an independent consultant. So again, we are so lucky that we have Daniel Peter with us today, and I don't want to waste any more time and hand it over to Daniel. Up to you, Daniel, now. You want me to? I'll stop sharing and I'll make you the presenter. Yep, you are the presenter. You can share your screen now. Awesome.
And I'm off mute. Great. So let's get this. I guess we just click. Where's the start button here? Present. So does the shared slide deck look good? Can everybody see the slides? Oops. Yeah, looks good. Okay, great, great, great. Sorry about that. So, yes, thank you for that introduction. Very nice to meet you. So just a quick overview of what we're going to be, what I'm going to be presenting today. Kind of three distinct parts. First of all, I want to give some advice from my experience developing Lightning apps. Then I'm going to show you a brief demo, and then I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So I'm assuming that folks in the group have been building on Lightning for some time. You've probably been doing these trailheads. You're very familiar with Lightning, but still maybe having some challenges. So I think the most value I can give the group here is to give my experience from building on Lightning for the past couple of years and give you the things that I think are important to focus on. Hopefully you'll learn some new tips, but I don't want to get into a lot of the standard syntax, like stuff. I don't want to repeat what's already on Trailhead. So I don't want to tell you how you do, syntax like data service or, maybe some of the base component stuff, but maybe touch on some of those things that I think are very important, but not really emphasized enough. So kind of my tips and tricks and kind of the best parts or the important parts of Lightning from my perspective. So the first thing I just have to mention this again is my domain, and the reason why, we work in a lot of different orgs all the time, and it seems like this bites me every time. I always forget to turn on my domain. So before you start building Lightning stuff, turn it on, and it's like a 2-step process, right? Maybe 3-step process. So it's not just, one click. It's like, see if the domain's available, test it out, log in, deploy. Because even sometimes me or other folks that I work with have thought they had it turned on, but they didn't go through the whole process of deploying it. So hopefully this isn't an issue. It's been an issue in the past because they kind of scare you for turning it on, like it's going to break your links or something if you turn it on. But I think if people have built their apps, their orgs correctly, and they've got dynamic URLs that they get, either from merge fields in their email templates, or if you're doing some integrations, you're getting that URL from the response of the login API, because those URLs always could change. They were never guaranteed to be, NA14 or something. They could always move you to a different pod, so you never should have hard-coded those URLs to start with. So first step, when you're thinking Lightning, just think my domain. First step, get that turned on. Otherwise, it'll surprise you when your Lightning stuff's just not working. Okay, so the first thing I like to think about when I'm building a Lightning app are the containers. And I don't mean like Lightning container component, but I mean sort of the wrapper around the Lightning component. So the Lightning component itself is kind of your least common denominator. I'm pretty sure you're going to be building a Lightning component no matter what. But, how are you going to surface that component? There's actually more ways than what I've listed here. These are some of the common ones. You can put the Lightning component in a standalone Lightning app, which will launch in a new tab with its own URL. You can attach it to a Lightning component tab and then view that within Lightning Experience. You can drop that Lightning component inside an existing record page with App Builder. You can also build an app and surface it with Lightning Out and Visualforce. You can even surface it through the utility bar. The reason I like to think about this is I see this as a very high-level planning, sort of a strategic decision to make. So the things you want to think about are, are your users using Classic or Lightning or a mixture of both? You want to think about forward thinking for the future. So you want to think, this component's, I'm building it for this reason now, or this app I'm building for this reason now, but what are the pieces of it that I think maybe people will want to use in other places? So maybe you're building some chart widget that's part of your app, but you kind of have a hunch that the sales department will want to put the same graph in the opportunity in 6 months or something like that. So think about these kind of things, and that will help you to figure out your container strategy. I think the key here is to maybe do a little bit more work that will save you a lot more work down the road. So maybe you just build this component and you implement has record ID on it, and you pass the record ID in yourself in your app, but now that component can be dropped into a Lightning record page later. These sorts of things. So I sort of talked about the first one here. Second one, consider developing a Lightning app, even if it isn't that final container. So you might build a component that you're going to want to put in a component tab in Lightning Experience. But maybe during the development process, you just want to view this thing within a Lightning app. And the reason for that is the Lightning app gives you some nice iterative capabilities. There's some hot reload stuff with a dev console. And it just doesn't do as aggressive of a caching as Lightning Experience. You can obviously turn the caching off in Lightning Experience, but even still, when you're refreshing over and over again, it just takes a little longer with Lightning Experience. So you don't have to do this, but you might consider it, especially if you have a very complex app with a lot of different components, or single component with a very complex UI. You might just get a little more efficiency by developing a Lightning app. But the thing to be aware of is not all features work in all containers. So the strategy of building one common component that works everywhere, you have to be careful with that. Things like navigate to S object don't work in all contexts. Some of the community stuff don't work in all contexts. So I think if you have this strategy of building one component that can be surfaced in many containers, be aware of what features. You may not be using any of these features that are only available in certain contexts. But if you are, you're going to have to be a little bit conditional. You're going to have to say, if I'm in this context, do that. If I'm in this other context, do this other thing. So just be aware of that. Don't assume because you can, drop it into a community that it's going to work the same as when you dropped it into Lightning Experience. And the other big consideration is Classic. So are your users still using Classic? And if they are, that doesn't mean you can't build things in Lightning. In fact, Classic and Lightning can coexist pretty well. So one of my favorite ways to build a Lightning app when users are still on Classic is to use a standalone app. So you can put a link maybe in the home page, on the sidebar or somewhere else that just launches your Lightning app as a standalone new tab. And even Salesforce does this. So you'll notice like the data import wizard, when you're in Classic, this thing launches as a new Lightning app. And that lets Classic and Lightning coincide, live together. You can also just tell your users to switch over, right? So if it's a Lightning experience, if you build it in Lightning Experience and users are still using Classic, just say, hey, if you want to use my app, you need to switch over to Lightning, use my app, and then you can switch back to Classic. And the last way that's interesting, but I don't see it used quite as much, you can build your app and surface it in Lightning Out, either exclusively in Lightning Out, or you can have like a Lightning app and Lightning Out, and then you can just drop that in a Visualforce page with a Visualforce tab in Classic. Maybe there might be a little performance overhead when you first load the app. It might take a little longer to load, but this definitely does work. It is an option. So, I'm listing my tips here in sort of orders in which I like you to think about them. So kind of this container strategy is first. The next thing I like to think of are the layouts. And this is really important. So, Lightning gives you both a base component, and also Lightning Design gives you this CSS framework for a grid. And they're very similar. I think the Lightning layout is basically just a base component simplified version of the grid. So instead of using CSS classes to change all the different options of the grid, you use their parameters. But I think you need to be familiar with both. And my strategy is try to use Lightning layout and layout items first. And then if you're doing something really custom, you may not be able to get exactly the presentation you want with the layout items. So then you might have to switch to the SLDS grid, which gives you a little bit more full control over, it's both gives you full control over all the options of the grid layout, plus it will allow you to kind of break out of it a bit and like override things more easily. And the reason I like to think about this early on, after I thought about the container strategy, is because this is really the rough sort of wireframe or the bones of your app. And so you really need to look at something like a UI mockup and plan at this point. If you try to do this late in the process, it's going to be extra work. So if you think about early, just, what does your app look like if you've got, some container like this, and maybe, you've got some components, maybe you've got 3 components in the top, like 3, Lightning Design cards in the top. How are you going to lay these things out? Maybe you have 2 in the bottom, maybe you've got some related lists down here. If you don't figure this out early on, you're going to fight it later on. So, use the grid, and this you can do. The nice thing about this is it's responsive design. So when you collapse this thing down, for a mobile layout, these 3 cards and these 2 cards will just all display as 5 cards. You get that for free with these different layouts. But the reason you want to think about it is it can get fairly complex. So like, you want maybe, you can do different, you can break this grid up into different number of components. So In this case, we have 3 and 2. So you might say, this one is 1 of 3. This one is 2 of 3. This one is 3 of 3. This one is 1 of 2. This one is 2 of 2. And, these are kind of your CSS classes you would use for your grid, 1 of 3, 1 of 2, this kind of thing. But also think about nested grids. So sometimes to get the presentation you want, you might have something like this. You might have, this might be 1 of 2, this might be 2 of 2, and then in here you might have a whole another nested layout or Lightning Design grid that has, 3 columns. So get the strategy figured out early, and it'll save you a lot of pain later on. So that's so really know these things well. Lightning layout item. Know everything you can do with them, because understanding this going into it, I would say it's kind of like you can't build a house without a good foundation. So really study these layout items, layout grids before you jump into things like base components and CSS. Understand this, basically the bones, the wireframe of your whole app, and get it roughed out, and make sure when you make your browser windows small, that it has the nice responsive design that you're looking for. It'll make developing the app much more pleasurable if you become an expert in these things and start early. So kind of along the lines of the layouts, the SLDS grid, there's some other really nice things that Lightning Design gives us that helps give you control over your app. And I think I'll pull up the site and show you some of these things, but these are the ones I think are most important. So obviously there's a lot of things that Lightning Design does, a lot of CSS shortcuts it gives you, but these are kind of around the on the theme of positioning and alignment. So this is how you get your app to behave and look like you want it to behave. So there's all these padding classes, which are very easy to use and very nice. So, if you want more room between the cards or less room between the cards, there's a whole slew of CSS classes. You can do the right padding, you can do the left padding, the top, the bottom, you can do all around. You can do extra small, medium, large, extra small. This padding CSS is what will get you, this is what you dial in to make your app sort of look pixel perfect without having to do very much work. Also, there's an alignment shortcut. So if you want to have like something centered in the page or centered within its container, both vertically and horizontally, this SLDS align absolute center is a super cool shortcut for that. Makes it very easy to achieve that layout. And similarly, if you're just laying out text within a container, you can align it to the right, to the left, center to achieve the layout you want there. And floats. So this is how you can, float a div inside another div, or float a card, inside a div. So it's on the right-hand side of the screen. Sometimes that's what you're looking to achieve, or you might want to have something floated to the left and the right. So I would say, this layout stuff is kind of the first level of granularity to achieving your layout. And then these padding alignments, floats are kind of the second level of granularity. Once you've got your whole bones and your structure, this is how you make the things fit where you want within the structure. So next thing to think about, I think, is interfaces. And, this is just the technical detail of the container that you choose. So you don't have to think about it too early on, but once you start building these things and you want to save them and you want them to, let's say, render within a record page, well, you have to have the right interface in there to do that. So there's many more interfaces than these, but these are the most common ones you might use. So this one's very common, the Flexi page, available for all page types. All page types, basically it means that your page will show up within all these things. You can build a Lightning app with Lightning pages. You can put it in a record page. You can put it in the utility bar. Available for record home. This is just record page, so it's like a subset of all page. And if you do this, make sure you've got the force has record ID interface in there as well. You can stack multiple interfaces, just commas separate them. So if you are doing this available for all page types, available for record home, go ahead and give it an SVG icon. It'll make it look a lot nicer. So, in the component bundle, there's this SVG, and that's what that's for. You paste in something like a path, SVG path, and it'll draw like a nice icon. So when you're searching for your component in the app builder through all those standard and custom components, it'll stick out and you'll see it nicely. And then force.app hostable is if you want to have it in Lightning Experience as a standalone app, a Lightning tab in Lightning Experience, or a standalone app. And then these, if you're doing a quick action, with or without header, and if you're going to put it in a community and you want it to be available in Community Builder, it's a different namespace. It's Force Community, available for all page types. So just think about both aspects of interfaces. Think about, where do I want my component to be available in one or more containers, but then and give it that interface, but then realize what that interface means and make sure that you're not making it available for an interface that it doesn't work in. So, whatever it needs in that context to work properly for that interface. And that's why we have these. That's why not everything is available everywhere, because you don't want to list all your components in every context and only have a few of them working. So this is a very important topic. Once you start building your app, you're going to need a strategy for the binding of the variables, the data, and how it flows or how it's referenced between the components. And in my opinion, this is kind of one of the most important areas of building an app, and sort of the least well documented, the least best practices out there. If you look at something like React, they give you Redux, which everybody uses. You look at Lightning, there's sort of multiple ways to do it, and they all have trade-offs. And so I think this, hope will emerge maybe in the next 1 year, with, I think we didn't have as much of a problem when we built sort of monolithic apps in Visualforce, but now with single page apps that are really componentized, this becomes a problem. So this is actually what I'm going to demo today, because I think it's that important, and that there's that little information out there on it. Probably most of you have seen that there's 2 different ways you can do a variable binding. They call it bound and unbound, or they call one-way binding, two-way binding and one-way binding. But basically the difference is you use this bang, this exclamation, or use this hash. And if you use the bang, you get certain behavior with the binding, and if you use the hash, you get different behavior with the binding, or the lack of it. So I won't talk too much more about that because I'm going to demo that. But I want you to be aware this is critical area for the success of your app. And maybe when we have Q&A, if somebody has suggestions there, I think this is a great one for discussion. So next thing I want to encourage you to do is leverage inheritance. This makes your code much more maintainable. They don't talk about it as much with Lightning because, it's a component-based, JavaScript-based language. It's not, we think of inheritance a lot when we think about Apex and Java and object-oriented programming, but you can also use inheritance in Lightning. The syntax is different. That's why it's a little strange, but the concepts are the same, very useful. So what you'll do is you'll have, I would encourage you, for any project you do, build one super component, make it extensible true, maybe give it an Apex controller, and then all you do in it is put v.body, and that just means that components that extend it will inject their body into it. So if you don't put that, you won't see your component when you extend. So that's a pitfall there, potential pitfall. And then all your components, I would extend that super component just like this. And if you do that, what this means is you can put code in the controller and the helper of the super component, and all your subcomponents can access that same code by saying, if you're in the controller, you can say helper.sum method, And what this will do is it'll call the method in that supercomponent's helper. And also, if you're already in the helper, you can just say this dot method, and it will call the method in the super. So, the best example of why you would do this is you might want to write centralized code that calls your Aura server actions, that calls your Apex. And you might make a helper method in your super component called call server. You might have some nice defaults and parameters for things like set storable, set background, and you might have a nice framework in there for handling errors. So if all your components are calling in to a single location to call the server, say you want to update the way you handle errors, you only have to update it in one place. So any of this kind of common code that you see yourself using in more than one component, stick it in the super component. They'll all inherit the code. Plus, if you make a new method with the same name in the component, it'll override it, so you're not stuck to it. So very cool. Leverage inheritance anywhere you think you have some shared code in your Lightning app. So this is something I've been doing lately, and I've been extremely happy with it. I'm not sure how many folks here have tried putting Einstein Analytics, formerly Wave, in their Lightning app, but this actually is a great synergy. It works really well, and Salesforce gives you multiple events you can fire, events you can handle, and components you can include that will let you make a nice interactive dashboard, hybrid app that has dashboards in it that are interactive, plus some Lightning components, forms, data tables, these types of things. They work together nicely. So if your app has requirements to have some type of dashboards in it, I would really encourage you to use Einstein Analytics. And so, talking some more about the way this works, there's a Wave dashboard Lightning component. You include this in your Lightning app. You give it the ID of the dashboard, some height, width parameters, a filter parameter, and it just renders the dashboard right there in your Lightning app. Very amazing results with very little work. So that's what we all love as developers, is to make really cool things really fast. How do you pass those parameters to Wave dashboard? Well, the Wave SDK component is a Lightning wrapper that lets you call the Wave API. So you can do things like, basically introspection, kind of look into your collection of dashboards, get properties about them. So you can kind of build very dynamic apps where Wave SDK will find available dashboards. Wave dashboard will render them based on certain criteria. And then, maybe like an example might be you click on a Lightning data table record, and that thing passes a filter into the dashboard to show, an Einstein dashboard, Einstein Analytics dashboard, just filtered to that record. This type of stuff works very well. It's very easy to do. Not well documented, though. That's one downside. That's why I've put these methods here, so you can maybe search on them and find a little information. But the next thing you can do is you have an event called Wave Update. And what this does, it lets you fire an event to refresh a dashboard without reloading it. So when you reload it, there's a performance hit you take. You kind of see the spinner, the Wave spinner, takes a while to reload. So if you fire the Wave Update event, you can just give it new filters. So this is very nice for this interplay between Lightning and Einstein Analytics. Just keep changing things on the Lightning side that update things on the Wave side. And then to go back the other direction, in Lightning, there's an event we can listen for called Selection Changed. And this is when you click on, say, you have a bar chart in Einstein Analytics, you click on a bar, it will fire the Selection Changed event. It'll put a payload of data in there which says, hey, this is the bar that he clicked on, this is the category. In Lightning, we can listen for that and we get that category, and then we can do something like take you to a page that drills into that category. So with these basic tools, you can build very impressive apps that you probably thought would take much longer to build. So it's a big accelerator. And I've got some resources here. I think I'll come back to these at the end. And now I would like to jump into small demo. So here is happens to be a Winter 19 pre-release org. You can see we did the number one thing. We enabled my domain. So our Lightning app will work. And I'm going to launch Developer Console. And I've got some components here, and I've got a Lightning app. So what I've got is I have a demo app, and I've got a child component in the demo app, and I've got a sibling component, and I've got a grandchild component. So the way these things all sit together, the outermost container is the Lightning app. It's got a child component. It's got a sibling component, which sits at the same level of the hierarchy, parent with 2 children. This child component has a grandchild component, which is a level deeper in the hierarchy. So this is the app, and what it does I'm going to demonstrate some of this variable binding and how do you manage state, how do you pass data between the components. I think this is one of the most important things about building a Lightning app that's not that clear. So what I've got is I've got a bound string, unbound string, and the way I'm saying they're bound or unbound is just with this bang and this hash that I'm passing to the child. And then I've got a bound map and an unbound map. So same thing, bang and hash for bound and unbound. But you notice the string is a primitive data type, and the map is a complex data type, right? Key value pairs. So this is something very important to understand. Maybe you've already realized this. The behavior of primitives versus complex objects are very different in Lightning. Perhaps a little frustrating at first. And the thing to note is there's defaults here for all of these hello world stuff. When I look at, say, the child component, there is no defaults. So all these child, sibling, no defaults. Grandchild, there's no defaults. So when we look at this app, everything's populated, but we really only defaulted it up at the application level, and it passed everything down. So we know at least, at a basic level, if you set things whether they're bound or unbound, they're going to propagate down through all the children, siblings, grandchildren. So we've already learned that much. What I'm using in this case is I'm using the UI input text Lightning base component. You don't have to use this one. There's many others, but this one has an interesting feature and that it auto updates when you change the value. So the change event is fired like when you tab out of the field. So what I want to do is play with changing these values so you can see how they behave. So the first one, this application bound string, it says hello bound world, and let's just put a number 1 after it and then tab out. You can see this is propagated down to the child component, the sibling component, and the grandchild component, no problem. And we can even go to like this sibling component and change to a 2, tab out, and you can see it's changing its child, the grandchild component, to its sibling, and back to the top parent application. So we have this 2-way binding that works at all levels. Very nice. I love this personally. This is like a very powerful feature of the platform. So now we have another, primitive value here, which is unbound. So what happens when we change here? Nothing. So the way this unbound or one-way binding works, when all these components first load, it passes the value in there, but it doesn't have a reference to the original value. Each one gets its own copy. So when you change these things, only like on load does it get the value, but you come back in here and change it, it doesn't propagate anymore. So sometimes you want that behavior, but it's not as interesting as this tight two-way coupling. The next one is our complex object, our map. So this could be, a list of S objects. It could be, some complex object with nested strings, nested arrays, anything. They all behave the same. But what happens when we update this one? So we'll put a 2 on this bound map. We'll tab out, and we can see it propagates to the child, the sibling, and the grandchild. So that's pretty cool. If you remember when we change the bound string primitive, it just binds all the way back up. But how about when we change the bound map? It doesn't. So even though we have two-way binding on both the primitive and the complex data type, they don't behave the same. The primitive binds through everything, up and down. The complex one only binds back down. So obviously this is a problem, right? We need all these components to communicate with each other. We need some central place to store the state. I like the idea of being able to store the state, up in the top parent container and have everything reference that sole source of truth. So how do you get it up there? Well, you have to, fire an event. So this is kind of right now, probably the most common way to do this. So with our bound map, we can change this to some value and then fire an event. In this case, it's an application. I fired an application event, but only this is listening for it. This thing updates the value, and then it comes all the way back down. So you kind of have a circle, right? You go from the outer leaf back to the root, and then it propagates to all the leaves. So this thing looks like, we fire this event, this do update method. We fire an application event. The event has a parameter called payload. And for the payload, we're taking that bound map, that attribute from right here. We're putting that bound map into the event, firing it. The demo app is listening for it right here. And when we hear that event, we get that payload and we set the bound map value. And by setting this bound map value right here, since it's got the binding, two-way binding, it propagates down through all the children. So I'd say that's the most common way. I'm not saying this is the best way or the way that's going to emerge is the best practice for doing things. But this is the way you'll see most people doing these now. Another thing, as you noticed, these have very nice behaviors. You don't have to fire any events. They just bind all the way up and down. So this means when you're building your app and you're thinking about this thing, let's say you have an S object and it has 3 fields. If you have a choice of having an attribute that has that S object in it and having to fire events to get those changes to bubble back up, you might want to consider taking each field of that S object and making it a primitive attribute, a number, a Boolean, and a date or something like that. And then you'll get this binding for free. So what I'm seeing is this behavior, to get that nice binding, it might end up encouraging you to make lots of these primitive attributes on your components. So they're all tightly bound together without having to do any eventing. So that might be a pattern that you might use in some cases. So, in those slides, I listed some resources, and you probably know these already, but they're just so important. I want to, kind of underscore their importance. So number one is this component library. This thing is amazing, and it just keeps getting better. So you can be pretty successful Lightning developer just with this reference. So you can see this nice card view. If you don't even know what you're looking for, you can just browse through here. You know, we talked about the importance of the layout. So this is interactive. You can pick different layouts. You can say, oh yeah, I want to build something that looks like this. You can come down here. You can just copy, this has the base component code. You can copy and paste this right into your app, change it around a little bit, you know, or maybe you want like 4 columns. So you can look at this and change a little bit to have 4 columns. But you can also, since this stuff works, you can test it out, right? So you want to see how it's going to work, you know, with a responsive design, you know, well, I don't like that too much. So, you know, maybe, you know, actually none of these are very responsive. So it's good to know that. So any, you know, any base component you might want to use, you know, the data table, you can come in here, you can, it's got these options so you can see different versions of it. And, you know, this even gives you some interactive switching features on and off. You can see it in the UI before you build it. Yeah, that's what I want. You know, come down here, grab the markup. This is like the Lightning component bundle right here for you. You know, grab the controller code, the helper code. So it's like total quick start. And even before you start, you can tailor your quick start. So this thing just keeps getting better and better every release. So this should be your #1 go-to for building Lightning. I just have it bookmarked right here on my browser. For a little bit more complex things, maybe more on the eventing side, the Apex side, you know, the Lightning Components Developer Guide is kind of my #2 resource that I go to. So keep that one handy. I'm sure you've all spent a lot of time reading this one. And then the third one is the Lightning design itself. So when the base components don't give you what you want, come in here, look at something like grid, and you know, maybe you want to know about column reordering, and you want to, you know, see how it works in a responsive design. These aren't interactive, so this is just markup. When you click on things, nothing happens. But you know, some of that important stuff I was talking about, the alignment, you know, this is how you get that really cool absolute center. You just add the CSS class. So these are, you know, examples you can copy. The padding stuff is invaluable. So top right, bottom left, let's say you're looking at something and, you know, the edge is too close. How do you move it over? We'll just go to the right pad, and you would just add the CSS class, you know, SLDS P right small or P right extra large. So, you know, keep that one handy also. Those 3 resources I've got in the slides here. And so those are my key tips for kind of people who have been building on Lightning, maybe for a year or 2, people that know the syntax, but maybe are looking for like stories from, you know, stories from the trenches kind of thing. Like those are the tips I can give. And so with that, I'd like to open it up for some Q&A.
Hey Dan, Sudhakar here. So it's really a good presentation.
Got some feedback there. Maybe just somebody can try muting. Cool. So how do we work the...
Can you hear me, Dan?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep, it's a very good presentation. I like the demo. I have a quick question here, like this bound and unbound things, right?
Mm-hmm.
We showed like, you know, this unbound stuff, if we change something on the grandchild, it's not getting propagated to the top level, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the mechanism that you showed at the last, right, you know, firing the event, I think we
Hmm.
can do the same thing with firing event and propagating back to the child at the parent level, right?
Yeah, yeah. It depends if it's application. Component events bubble up, and application events get broadcast everywhere.
Uh-huh.
So generally, events are a little bit, maybe you could say a little bit of an expensive thing to do. So I would say if you have a choice in doing something with or without an event, if you can do it without the event, your performance will be better. And then even to take it a step further, if you can do it with a component event instead of an application event, your performance will be even better. So just some performance considerations there. But to get things from a child to a parent,
Mm-hmm.
if they're complex data types, uh, you kind of have to do the event, unfortunately. So you do have a performance hit when you're going back up.
Right. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the second questions that I have on the web analytics stuff, right? It's a very
Hmm.
interesting things, and I'm
Hmm.
definitely going to explore that. But what is your like you? I am quite sure like you have already explored that area of the Salesforce part, right? Integrating the web with Lightning, right? So what
Hmm.
is your initial feedback? Is it performance wise? Is it good? And things are looking good.
Yeah, it's very good. I think maybe the last 1 to 2 years, I've been very happy. So I don't know how long you've been following Wave, but there was the GM Keith Bigelow who was there, and they announced a Dreamforce, and this thing was very expensive. Didn't have a lot of adoption. Kind of went on for a while. Keith Bigelow left Salesforce. GM Keaton Karkanis came in, and he's really done an amazing job. They brought the price way down on this and the features way up. So I'm very happy with it. Before it was pretty cool, but it was
Mhm.
like too expensive. Customers didn't want to pay for it.
Right.
But now it's like amazing and it's cheap. So I would recommend using it. The only downside is you build a Wave data set and you have to run a data flow to update that data. So the downside is your Wave dashboards may have data that's like an hour old. So if you're in a
Uh,
situation where you need real-time data,
mhm.
there's some ways to get it, but it's not the same as when you just query with Apex and you're getting all your real-time data right there.
Right.
It's a cached copy of the data, and that's why the performance is so good. So that's the trade-off.
Okay.
You can
Okay.
have 100 million rows in Wave and see a dashboard on that in 2 seconds and slice and dice it, but the data might be like an hour old. So
So is it like within 1 hour it's keep on getting updated? So that's a kind of backlog.
yeah, basically where it sits right now, you get I think 32 refreshes every 24 hours. So you can sequence those up. Like if say just during business hours, like 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., you could do it more frequently than an hour. But
Okay.
so
But
you could get like 15-minute old data, which maybe is good enough.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
And what about your experience with Einstein and Lightning?
Hmm.
Like,
So when you say Einstein, we have like the vision stuff, the
right.
sort of API stuff that they've given us Apex wrappers. Then we also have prediction builder. Were you thinking one or the other, or?
I think the prediction builder.
Yeah. So I think that is independent of UI framework. So whether you're building a classic app or Lightning app,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of operating at the database level, sort of like a workflow or a trigger would do.
Mm-hmm.
It's putting these values in there. So there aren't really any considerations for Lightning there. It's just the same way you would build any app, except you
Mm-hmm.
have these nice predicted fields that show up. Um, so I think it's great. It's still early, a little expensive, but a lot of potential there to make people's lives easier to
Awesome.
sort your data on this predicted field to make the important stuff rise to the top.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, prediction builder is awesome. Customers that maybe thought AI was out of their reach can now get it for like almost nothing in terms of
Exactly.
effort. They have to pay some money, but no effort.
Right. Right.
And I think on the on the vision side, there's some very interesting things you can do now, and that maybe is more where the lightning aspect becomes more important, because you can build these interactive apps where you're uploading photos and identifying them and doing things with them. So the Apex wrappers are good for that. Maybe you noticed, I haven't tried this. Actually, I had some trouble. I have tried this. I had some trouble calling the APIs directly from the client side.
Okay.
For two reasons. One reason was the chattiness of the APIs caused many API calls to need to be made to do one task. So I remember what I ended up doing was making something on Heroku that maybe did dozens of API calls, but from Salesforce, you only had to do one. So performance was much better, because this thing in Heroku was kind of making lots of calls in parallel and then transforming the results and returning them to Salesforce. This was the demo I did at Dreamforce last year when I was using the Intent API.
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, so,
that brings a good topic. Like, what's your plan for this Dreamforce, Daniel?
Sure. Yeah, I'm doing probably 3 sessions. Only one of them is a technical session. And this one is probably geared more for ISVs. Okay. And this is, I'm going to be presenting, so I'm an independent contractor, independent consultant, but in January I left Canandy. We were building an ERP on Salesforce. Right. So this is some really cool stuff that we learned how to do at Canandy, some lessons learned on how to manage very complex security in a simplified way with custom permissions. So I've got my ex-CTO from Canandy, ex-coworker. He's also independent consultant now. We're going to co-present this session.
Wow, that's good.
Basically, yeah, what it's teaching you how to do is how to break your app into, instead of field level security with permission sets, which are very hard to manage, it's going to teach you how to break your security into like a role or like an action that you want to do on an object. And for that, in that context of that action that you're doing, it runs everything in system mode, because the custom permission says you already have access to do this thing. So it's kind of a framework for how to do that. And maybe not so interesting to customers. Customers, I think, will tend to run more things on the back end in system mode anyway, whether you have permissions or not. But ISVs have to be much more careful on this, even for security review purposes, if nothing else. But the people who buy ISV software expect that they can fully document who has access to what.
Correct.
Yeah.
Wow, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, the other 2 sessions will be more around like community, things like that. So I've been very fortunate to have some great experiences with the Salesforce community around the world. So I'm going to talk about some of those.
Wow.
Yeah, keep an eye out. I'll start advertising my sessions probably next week.
That's perfect. Yeah, I'll definitely attend those. At least at that ISV session, I'll definitely try to attend.
Cool. Yeah, it's a full-blown session, 40-minute breakout room. So hopefully we get good attendance there. I think it's core. The title of it sounds very core, important, like something a lot of people are going to want to see. Simplifying security with custom permissions. That's the title. So probably has a big audience. I don't know if everybody who shows up will stay for the whole thing. Once they see what it's really about, they might feel like it's over their head, because this is for organizations with like many custom objects with many custom fields.
That's true.
Not everybody has that.
Right. But I think it's still common. Like, people will still get that interest and definitely join that session.
Mm-hmm. And of course they're recorded. So.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Good. I think we don't have any questions here. But guys, like, I'll share this recording with you in like, probably another 1 hour or 2 hours. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. you have Daniel Peter's Twitter account. I think he will be more than happy to help you, like if you have any questions out of that. But truly speaking, Daniel, it's a very good session. We able to learn so many things, and we are so fortunate that you know spend time for our Kitchener user group
Well,
development.
thank you. Yeah, and I'm actually very excited to learn from any of you. So if you see anything that I've told you and you figure out a better way to do it, please reach out to me. This stuff is like so new and so big that there's no way anybody can know all these best practices. They're still emerging. So
Right.
I'm hoping to get information back from everybody here as a side benefit of giving you some information. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll definitely, what we probably need to do, we need to, go through your recording one more time, or probably one or two more time, to just, make things, comfortable for us. I think it's a very good session, but people will go through that recording and they will definitely come back to you with their experience.
Yeah, so these are the things that I learned later on, and I wish I learned them earlier. So if anybody, feels like they're struggling with lightning, hopefully if you really study these things, then come back to it, you'll feel like much more empowered, like more of an expert,
Absolutely, no doubt.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Daniel.
All right.
Thanks a lot,
Thank you.
and yeah, have a nice weekend.
Okay. Thank you. You
Thanks a lot.
too.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.